physics video. Yay, maybe. Everything's irritating, so we'll just see if this is less irritating or something like that. Commenters. So anyway, some guy, hey, Zagadati. Anyway, I'm going to call him Raggy Asswipe. Anyway, so this is his commentary after he was rebuffed by a couple of commenters. It's becoming more and more clear to me that the people on this channel who argue with me and defend flock of fish physics. So again, if you're just going to say that the metaphors are no good, that's okay. But I mean, do it because my metaphor actually means what I'm saying, that it's a flock of fish. You know. But you don't understand that the dynamics of a school of fish are that the school of fish doesn't go anywhere unless the fish go somewhere. But that's all it's being used to point out. And again, so you're going to ride with your bent space and your dark matter and say that those are okay metaphors. That we can't just mock them and then we'll be done with the argument. I'll just say something, mock that without going into the fact. Like I said, I've already explained that it has nothing really to do with bent space. It's a convergence. And they're afraid to even call it that, so they call it an anti-divergence. That's what Susskind does. He's so afraid to use the word convergence because of what it implies. Vacuum cleaner. Anyway. So again, in defending a unification theory, so understand this silly fish theory unifies physics, clearly explains magnetism, which I'll do a video on just because I think it's time. That other and details that physics hasn't even gone anywhere near. And so again, but don't deal with those arguments. Just pretend there are no arguments that have been made, because you're a raggy shithead. What do you call him? Raggy something. Asswipe. Anyway. Okay. Are intellectually and emotionally insecure wannabe eggheads. So this is more just psychobabble. Instead of making arguments, these petty weasels, again, just have to keep insulting people's motivations or some kind of developmental character. Instead of just pointing out how that's stupid. Because. Anyway, the problem with that is not, the problem with that is you're not eggheads. Well, again, your straw man presumption that they want to be something called an egghead would be idiotic anyway. Because frankly, egghead is usually associated not with people who are smart, but people who are pretending to be smart. Anyway, and you can never be eggheads because you have a bad attitude about knowledge and how it works. And this coming from some lame person, not making an argument to the arguments that have been made, not making a counter-argument, just slandering and recklessly slopping and throwing mud. He's a mudslinger. And yet he's going to, he can properly analyze what knowledgeable people would waste their time doing, slinging mud. That's how the knowledgeable win their arguments, slinging mud. For instance, you seem to think physics is something you can figure out in your own head if you close your eyes and started racking the old Razunuk, whatever. Everything gets figured out in somebody's head by thinking about it. So I don't know how you thought they came up with DNA molecule or lots of things. Somebody had to think about it. They had to draw pictures. They had to work it out. That's how it's done. So I guess you don't know anything really about how knowledge is acquired, but that's how it's done. You You put the pieces on the table, and then you try to put them together. Idiot. You really are just such a fucking idiot. Alright, that step actually comes after you've learned what the facts are. So again, you're establishing those facts for us. And what fact are you claiming I haven't accepted that's, in your opinion, you're required to accept? So exactly what fact haven't I accepted? The existence of gravity or something? What exactly is your contention that I haven't accounted for? What physical fact haven't I accounted for? Asshole. Liar. You need to look at the facts first. Well, again, what fact am I missing, asshole? Dark matter's a fact. You say gravitational lensing is a fact. Well, do you have anything called real evidence, like hard evidence? Do you? No. All right. Yeah, you learn what the facts are. If you need to look, you need to look at the facts first. This is true for anything, not just physics. Wow, you're just so insightful. Not. Also, many of you can't follow a train of thought because you apparently have working memory deficits. Well, apparently you can't understand anything. I mean, my video was fairly explicit, and I did explain, you know, in I think, adequate detail, that the idea of bent space was merely a God of the gap solution like dark matter. It doesn't really answer the question. It doesn't answer anything about repulsion or attraction or mechanism whatsoever. It just shoves it into a place we can't access and pretends a magical force, entity, ether, accomplishes the task, and that's a fact. That's a fact. For instance, I commented about how bent space does not equal ether, and these idiots went to argue that space is an ether, but they forget that my comment was in response to the claim that bent space doesn't exist, so the thing bending it has to be an ether. But I'm saying that a medieval notion that nobody can follow this train of thought. But I'm saying that's a medieval notion. No, the argument is that the theory that there is this thing in space, this entity, that's creating a convergence, that's obliging the matter to flow with this flow, this converging. They'll say the word graviton now, by the way. Just thought I'd let you know. They actually say the word graviton. As if there is a ton pushing. Asshole. Anyway. This thing is bending, but I'm not saying it's immediate. Nobody can follow this train of thought. If bent space is necessarily an ether, then why not Euclidean space? Well, again, I don't have any obligations to play in your straw man. So, frankly, this whole conversation doesn't have anything to do with Euclidean geometry versus whatever your geometry is. It has to do with the fact that straight lines are straight lines, curved lines are curved lines, circles are circles, squares are squares. You want to pretend they're not, that's fine, but what does that have to do with whether or not there's an actual force that moves planets toward each other? Gravity is an actual force, an actual thing, not a convergence from nowhere, but a convergence made of something. What does that have to do with anything Euclidean? Oh, that's right, not a damn thing. That's just a straw man. You guys don't even know how to define ether. Well, it's not my obligation to define something that is used as a word to describe people who believe that the mechanism is the player, that they're not materialists. they're etherists. So they think everything is movement on some domino board, some board set up, some invisible board, and the board is telling the stuff what to do. This is probably why you can't understand the math. Well, again, the math is a convergence. There's nothing complicated in the sense that the idea of the math is simple. The complicated part is obviously to do the math explicitly accurately, you have to integrate it over an infinite number of microseconds in a sense, because the experiment changes with each quanta of energy that moves. The masses and the reality changes, and that's when the math gets complicated. But we all know that they don't use Einstein's field equations when they shoot a satellite into space, because they don't need to be that exact. So why are you pretending it's somehow necessary to the theory? It's completely unnecessary. It's a convergence, nothing more. Let's see. If bent space is necessary and ether, then why not Euclidean space? Let's see. This is probably why you can't understand the math, because you have poor working memory, and you need to have good working memory to do complicated math like differential and integral calculus. And again, what does calculus have to do with dark matter? What does calculus have to do with even the two models of cause? The model of, let's say, Mach gravity, the idea of a particle field, and let's just ignore the defects that I have fixed. Let's just pretend they're fixed. It does everything the other model does, except it does it more accurately. Because, as I can explain, the convergence doesn't even, Einstein's theory doesn't even do what Maxwell's theory did, which was recognize that if you had hollow spheres, you'd have a different, the convergence disappears. So the problem with this point convergence is it doesn't really exist in gravity, in the sense that if you could actually get to the center of a planet, there would be no gravity. There'd be no convergence. You'd have no indication of it, because it doesn't exist from the inside. It's created from the outside. It's a push force, newsflash. And what do differential equations have to do with recognizing the fact that push is a more a simpler concept than pull? Does it have anything? Does a differential equation have anything to do with that? No, it doesn't. Just some observations to consider next time you mistakenly believe you figured something out when you probably didn't, says the asswipe who can't even make an icon on YouTube. The authority says so. Yeah, well, next time, why don't you try making an argument, pussy, and make one that's actually accurate, and then you won't have people rag on you in the comments section. So we'll go to his original comment. Some of the guy was talking about Pluto. I'm not that terribly interested, or Jupiter or something. Yes, whatever. And Neil's not okay. So it's a comment on a Neil deGrasse video. Alright, so this is what he said earlier. Bent space isn't an ether. The fact is that there, as Susskind describes it, this is his illustration. If you took two pieces of glass and you cut a hole in the glass in the middle, and then you had an endless source of fluid that could go in between from the outside that came into the glass. So the thickness of the glass is even throughout. There's no pressure but the pressure of the drainage. And that's how he describes, as a metaphor, the anti-divergence of gravity by Einstein's theory. Now, that is a something. So he's using a metaphor that's pretty full of something. So you can't really get away with this idea that, well, no, it's nothing, and therefore you can't make any arguments against it because it doesn't have any form, and it doesn't do any, it has no functions, and it's blah blah. Yeah, it does. It has all those things. And you're saying it's like a god. It's invisible, intangible, indetectable, on anything. It's just a magic force that creates a model that is similar to, a reality that's similar to a model of a perpetual energy machine. All right, anyway. You characterize it as bending space. No, I characterize it as bent space, and the idea that, yes, you're bending the path of things that are traveling through the fluid, this moving convergence, and you're bending their path with it. Proves you can't grasp what's being claimed. No, you're the one who's desperately trying to rationalize an undefendable position, which is, yes, you're God of the Gappers. You're reaching for solutions that aren't really have anything to do with physics. They have to do with fairies and witches and hobgoblins, because apparently it's the Keebler cookie factory. It might as well be. Einstein might as well have said the Keebler elves, okay, have stropes and they're pulling on them all the time, pushing the planets together. It's just as useless as a description. It's just as vacuous as a description. It's saying something quite complicated in the sense that it's a bunch of fluid traveling at even pressure into a drain, and saying, but it's all an intangible. It's all in some magic dimension where we can't access it in any other way but, in our imaginations. That's a fairy. Anyway, space doesn't get it. It is bent. Again, it's semantic nonsense. The space isn't bent at all. The whole metaphor, that analogy of the bent fabric, the whole bending of something, is the two-dimensional for dumbasses versions. So it's not even real physics. It was a lie when it was first spoken. It was some sort of help the general public understand what we're talking about. But obviously in 3 dimensions it doesn't have a damn thing to do with bending anything. It has to do with a convergence. A fluid moving towards the center of gravity. Alright. You've talked about bent space. Then you compare it to a naive Neanderthal meme in your head. Again, he's back to Euclidean geometry. Where did I make a comparison to Euclidean geometry? Bent space as a mathematical formula, Einstein's theory, is a description of an anti-divergence. It's the opposite of a light bulb, and that's all it is. And decide that the bent model that fits the data is wrong. Well, again, there's other models that fit the data better and don't involve magic creations, that don't involve in making invisible forces. So you're saying your invisible force theory is better, physics, than the, why not just use the TON stuff that's already flying around that we know of? We know radio waves are invisible. We know lots of stuff's invisible to our sight. And we can only detect it with certain instruments that can detect these things. So why can't we believe there could also be TONs that are invisible to those detectors too? But fortunately we can still see their effect anytime we want to. What do you really think's moving this battery? You really think there's some sort of invisible structure of nothing, some nothing thing that is causing some kind of what? magical attraction forcey thing pulling it? And you don't think there's anything just God of the gaps made up about that? That it isn't just the same thing as me saying, well, God did that. Can't you see God obviously did that? Only God could do that. Look at it, it's magical. Look at that, it falls right down like that. It must be God that did that. There's no obvious, look, everything's invisible. There's nothing around. It must be God. How could it be physics, right? And you're going to sit there and impugn my intelligence? Fuck you. Anyway. All right, Euclidean geometry. Again, I still don't understand this problem with geometry when Einstein's math has lots of straight lines in it. The grid work is straight lines, and then he bends them. But again, let's understand, the bend has nothing to do with the three-dimensional model, because the three-dimensional model is a convergence. They're pulled in. All right. And decide that the bent model that fits the data is wrong, and your Neanderthal straight space, period. All right, so that's not even a complete sentence. That's why your mode of thinking is fucked. Well, I'd say your mode of thinking is fucked because you can't rationally understand how saying this is bent space is a cop-out answer. That it doesn't explain anything. Doesn't explain why it moves, why it accelerates, why it does a single damn thing. It explains none of it. You've just said it's magic by putting it in ether space. Alright, that is probably over your head, but worth pointing out anyways. So again, this isn't an argument about the argument, which is clearly Einstein's description has no mechanism. And if you don't have a mechanism, what's the difference between people who say the ether did it and people who say bent space did it? How are the two explanations different? Pausing for an answer. Alright, so somebody must have said something, or I don't know what he says. I take back the Neanderthal meme bit. That was not fair. Euclidean geometry was, and still is, a perfectly good approximation of the truth. So again, somehow straight lines, circles, and squares are suspect, as is flat earth theory. So again, nothing in my theory has anything to do with flat earth theory. Doesn't have anything to do with going backward and saying, let's go pick out something from the past like Ken Wheeler. I don't sit there and revere Plato. I'll defend Newton, certainly, from people who think somehow Newton was catastrophically wrong about something when, no, he just wasn't as complete. If you happen to be an architect, okay. Flat earth theory if you happen to be an architect. So again, no evidence of how I have a fact wrong. Okay, so Adam Lohr says, Einstein frequently referred to the ether in his theory. Yes, I've read some Einstein, but I don't remember him talking about an ether, but sure it could have happened, and that's the whole point. Everything about what Einstein proposed is in the category of something non-physical, something where we have no relationship to, beyond its effect on us, like a fairy, or a god, or an angel. Anyway, the ether in his theory, saying that in relativity, space without an ether is unthinkable. Well, I think it's pretty obvious, yeah. That an ether is necessary for the propagation of light in his theory, etc. He described it as a new type or different type of ether. I don't know whether that's true or not true, but it sounds plausible. And so the asshole, the raggy asshole, responds, Science isn't decided by cult of personality. So I don't even know what that has anything to do. How does that have anything to do with it? Clearly, it was Einstein's theory. Whether he was a personality or not has nothing to do with the argument. I don't even know what you're saying there. Clearly, science is a cult of personality. Einstein's one of the most famous names in human history. So anyway, so then Adam Lord says, I'm not sure how that pertains to what I'm saying. Yes, I don't see the connection either. You said bent space isn't an ether. I was just pointing out that at the very least Einstein himself considered it to be so. This doesn't mean that there is an ether just because Einstein said so, or that Einstein's theory is necessarily valid. Well, I'm just saying, if his theory is valid, there's not much else you can call the thing right now. Now, maybe later you want to call it superstructure. That's okay. Maybe you want to call it some kind of the table. You know, maybe you want to call it. You want to identify it as the Rube Goldberg machine that's actually making everything happen. But as it's currently described, it's an ether that creates convergences. So it's ether in motion. How is it not ether in motion? All right, a moving ether. Okay. Then Thomas says, that's interesting. There's little evidence one way or the other for an Einstein ether, and this fact has everything to do with your original argument reply. There's little evidence one way or the other. Well, so I don't know about the evidence either, but I'm saying the evidence can be logically deduced by anybody who understands what Einstein is proposing, which is a convergence, a flow of some sort of mechanism that moves planets with the flow, moves matter with the flow. So the matter moves based on its atomic weight in the flow of the bentness, the space-time. The space-time flows, the matter is moved by it. Now, if that's not an ether, what is it? An undescribable fairy. Okay, I'll go with that. If you don't mind that language, fine, we'll use that instead. Uncognizable, fairy-like creatures. All right. General relativity is not the same thing as ether theory. Einstein's ether is an add-on to GR. Einstein's ether is an add-on to GR. So now he's conceding the ether and saying that the subject wasn't general relativity because the subject was the concept of bent space. I suppose you have to take both of them together, but again, the argument's about what's causing gravity, and gravity isn't, and it doesn't have anything to do with space-time, it just has to do with bent space. I'm not a science genius. No, Thomas J. Kirk is probably an asshole. But doesn't this depend on fluids versus topographical invariance? Topological invariance. Coffee mugs, clean bottles. Not sure if that makes sense, but thanks in advance. Fluids. I'm just saying, you know, the subject is the cause of gravity. Okay? And the argument is that Einstein's convergence is essentially a pull force. It's essentially perpetual motion, free energy. If you're in empty space, the energy gravity creates is free to access. It's only when you're caught in a gravity well already in the convergence, when you're at the bottom of a convergence, that there's no way to access the force, because you have to expend energy to get back to the neutral. But if you start from a neutral position, gravity is like perpetual energy in the sense that you could you could take advantage of the one-way trips. All right. Space doesn't get bent, it is bent, says the superior mind. It is something that is a state and has properties. If it is a something rather than a nothing, then why such a strong objection to referring to it as a medium? Well, again, how can you avoid referring to it as a medium when every physics instructor is going to metaphor it as a medium? He's going to use mediums to describe exactly what it's doing. So you really can't avoid it being declared as something, and the real thing is whether you're going to declare it a material something. And that's sort of important. So yes, I'm a materialist. I believe forces are real things. The matter is made of real things, and the things are defined by the fact that there's a thing called nothing, and compared to nothing, there's a something. Something is distinctively different than nothing. Nothing is the zero. You're turning nothing into something other than a zero and making nothing something. I think that's retarded. I think it's breaking vocabulary and the use of it. The reality is the relationships are distorted, but it has to do with how matter manifests. Nothing to do with empty nothing having properties magically. Well, it really is, by their definition. So, yeah, superior mind sometimes says things that the reality is the relationships are distorted. I don't know what that means. But that has to do with how matter manifests. The reality is the relationships are distorted. No, the reality is that there's a material force, and the material force is creating the convergence. The quanta. Alright, superior mind, response to him. So let's read this. I don't care if you want to call space an ether. Well, you seem to care that if I called it an ether. So now you don't care. So you make all this stink about something you don't care about. Great job, asshole. That's your business. Einstein ether theory is different than what you're thinking of. So again, the subject is gravity. And I think it's reasonable to say that Einstein's theory of gravity depends on a non-material force to accomplish the movement of the planets. It's different than what Gary's thinking of, and I'm using the word ether in a sense that's different than space, bent or not. Well, again, I'm the one who has the right to say what the subject is, and I was talking about bent space, not bent space-time, and I was talking about gravity, and I made that pretty damn clear. So this is just bullshit. You're in over your head. No, you're desperately weaseling out of your poorly formed critique. So I'm simplifying it as much as possible. Well, that certainly wasn't a simplification. But truth is, space doesn't have to be the concept that you have in your brain. So again, we're just going to forget about the idea of a nothing being absolute, being a nothing. So now we can't use the word nothing because every nothing, well, it's taking up space, so it must be a something because, see, it's occupying space. They'll make arguments like that. I mean, there's no point. So there's no vocabulary anymore. I can't use zero as a number. And these are the people saying, don't you understand? You don't go calculus, and you don't understand this, and you don't understand that. And they're the ones abolishing concepts as rational as zero. I can't make a nothing in the universe now. What a crock of shit. And even if I accepted their silly premise that I can't make a nothing, I certainly can make something that's not a convergence. are anti-divergence. Yeah, I can certainly do that. So fuck you assholes. And that certainly I can call something that's a convergence, that's doing something, an ether. I mean, if it's doing something to the other stuff, that's not nothing, but everything's nothing because nothing's something. So you just can't, you can't go anywhere. Alright, I've watched quite a few, but one of Ken's points is that electrons are not physical, that there are bumps in the field. Everything's a bump in the field in his imagination, but I'm just saying, what's the point of bumps? What is that an explanation? I don't know why you people think Ken is providing you an explanation. Saying the word hyperboloid or bump or lump or perturbation doesn't explain attraction or repulsion. It doesn't explain any of the field effects. It's just rubbish. So, I mean, one of the videos I have to play is this. There's another nutter out there I just found, and he was arguing with Ken. But he gets his inspiration from God. It's just amazing what these people, you know, they're so confident and they just make up this nonsense. They're drawing heart shapes now. You know, the magnetic field is a heart shape, and it's just so fucking goddamn inane. Yeah, so look forward to that. I'll play some of that video, because that was just horrible. But that's the whole problem with this. You know, people have these terrible misconceptions about magnetism. They think it's doing something. You know, like there's actually stuff coming out of the north end and it's going back in the south end or something. They think there's flows of stuff. And it's really just a filter. Everything's got stuff flowing through it. And the only thing that makes a magnet distinctive is that it takes all the stuff of one polarization and shoots it out one way, you know, this side, and shoots all the other stuff. The black goes one way and the red goes through the top part. But it's all out. There's no circulation of anything. It's all straight line rays like a light bulb. It's like a red light at the bottom and a black light at the top. Little rays of light. Straight lines. And the field lines around the magnet have nothing to do with stuff orbiting it or doing any of that stuff. That just has to do with that anything that is attracted by a magnet or becomes influenced by a magnet is a magnet. It becomes magnetic. And it behaves like a magnet in a magnetic field. The field lines are just a representation of the balance of the different field strengths. So the little magnet is pointed different than the big magnet. So the field line magnets are going in the opposite direction of the magnet, and they're being attracted and repulsed both ends. So yeah, the ones at the tip of the magnet are pointed straight up and down because their south end is pointed towards the north end, and the north end is pointed away because it's repelling. You know. But yeah, they line up that way. Those are like almost neutral spaces. They're not really truly neutral, but I mean it's even magnetic tension. So if they're not pulled into the magnet, they'll settle on a location where the field is balanced. But it has nothing to do with anything moving. There's no moving parts in the magnet beyond the same moving parts that are in all of us, in the sense that we're all being bombarded by radiation. We get bombarded by radiation and we just end up, the radiation ends up coming out of us exactly the way it came into us. It doesn't change. A magnet has the property where if a red one comes in up here, it comes out my ass. And if a black one comes up my ass, it comes out my head red. Or black, I mean. And that's it. It segregates the polarization. But it's the same amount of force. And it's not doing any of this swirly crap. They come up with stuff like actual you know, swirls. And you're like, that hasn't even, there's not even a picture of that. There's not even iron filings to do that. Where do you come up with this shit? the force comes out and does this. It's not a Maxwell equation. Why do people make up shit like that? It's like, it's like even Kenny. This is stupid infinity symbol. Where do you get that shit from? Where's the evidence of any of it? Anyway. Alright, that's enough of video for now. I'll do another video later and maybe draw some magnet pictures. Didn't do a great job of explaining it, but it's just... magnet doesn't have any moving parts beyond the field energy that's moving through the magnet. But everything has energy moving through it. That's not distinctive. It's the fact that it filters it that's distinctive. That one kind goes one way and the other kind goes the other way. That's the distinctive bit. And that's what makes magnets significant. Alright, that's enough. Till later and such.